Liberty and freedom and democracy are so very precious that you do not fight to win them once and stop. Liberty and freedom and democracy are prizes awarded only to those peoples who fight to win them and then keep fighting eternally to hold them. Islamic terrorism. Islamic terrorist groups now operate throughout much of the world. If you want to know what they intend for us, take a look at the group known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. In 2014, ISIS declared itself a caliphate, a Muslim state ruled by the successor of the Prophet Muhammad, after overrunning large parts of Syria and Iraq. Its leader, who calls himself the Caliph, told followers that they will conquer Rome and own the world, if Allah wills. ISIS counts tens of thousands of well-armed fighters in its army, including some Americans and Europeans who have traveled to the Middle East to join its ranks. They have slaughtered anyone who gets in their way. ISIS militants have seized towns and forced thousands of men, women, and children to flee for their lives. They have murdered whole families, kidnapped and raped women, and sold women as sex slaves. They have buried children and young people alive. Public executions are commonplace. They line people up by the score, taunt them, then shoot them in the head. Sometimes they shove the bodies into mass graves. Sometimes they leave them lying in the sun. Some bodies have been tied to makeshift crosses and left as warnings. It is like a waterfall of blood, one eyewitness to killing said. There are more and more executions, and now the children watch like they are used to it. Religious leaders say that the persecution of Christians in ISIS-controlled regions has become a genocide. Churches have been burned, crosses and statues of the Virgin Mary attacked, ancient books and artifacts destroyed. The destruction has included sites holy to Jews as well as Muslims who do not adhere to ISIS theology. In July 2014, ISIS members blew up the tomb of the prophet Jonah in Iraq's northern city of Mosul. ISIS members have burned captives alive. They have cut off the heads of innocent Westerners, including Americans, and proudly posted the videos on the internet. They run terrorism schools where boys as young as 8 practice beheading people. It was like learning to chop an onion, one teenager reported. You grab him by the forehead and then slowly slice across the neck. Today our swords are unsheathed towards you, government and citizens alike, ISIS has warned Americans, and we will not stop until we quench our thirst for your blood. Who are the terrorists targeting the United States? Most terrorism against the United States has been committed by Islamic radicals who want to force their interpretation of Muslim teaching and law on others. These terrorists hate everything the United States stands for. We know this because they proudly tell us so every time they kill. Islamic terrorist groups operate in the Middle East and Africa, in Europe, in Central and Southeast Asia, and beyond. They have become adept at recruiting followers through the internet. In addition to ISIS, the most notorious groups include Al-Qaeda, the Base, Hamas, Zeal in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah, Party of Allah in Lebanon and Syria, Boko Haram, loosely translated, Western education is a sin, in Nigeria and nearby regions, and the Taliban, students, in Afghanistan and northwest Pakistan. These groups make up a fraction of the 1.6 billion Muslims worldwide. The majority of Muslims have nothing to do with terrorism, nor do they want to have anything to do with it. But even a fraction of 1.6 billion means untold numbers bent on jihad. They can murder a lot of people. On September 11, 2001, we learned what just 19 terrorists can do. Furthermore, a significant minority of Muslims overseas, millions of people in some nations, sympathize at least in part with Islamic terrorist acts and worldview. The word jihad means struggle in Arabic, and in Islam the term is sometimes used to describe an inner struggle to live a moral life. To most people, however, and certainly to Islamic radicals, the term means something quite different: holy war. Jihad is exactly what Osama bin Laden, mastermind of the attacks against the World Trade Center and Pentagon on September 11, 2001, had in mind when he called on every Muslim who believes in God and hopes for reward to obey God's command to kill the Americans and plunder their possessions. The aim of jihadists is to wreak havoc on Western nations, especially the United States, or the Great Satan as they call us. In Arab regions, they are bent on annihilating the State of Israel. Wherever they gain power, Islamic radicals oppress not only Westerners and non-Muslims, but also deviant Muslim leaders who do not follow the radicals' beliefs. They are determined to impose totalitarian rule on Muslim lands and extend Islamic dominion over the world. Why do Islamic terrorists attack us? There has been much theorizing about the root causes of Islamic terrorism. Some suggest it springs up in cultures overwhelmed by poverty, ignorance, and despair, and that the best way to end terrorism is to raise people's hopes and prospects, because striking back only embitters them more. Raising hopes and prospects is a worthy goal, but the problem with that theory is that many terrorists come from middle-class backgrounds, or better. Wealthy, privileged people like Osama bin Laden often mastermind or finance terrorist operations. Islamic terrorists claim that they act in response to the sins of the United States and other Western nations, such as publishing pornography and establishing military bases in Saudi Arabia. They assert that United States foreign policy is imperialistic, that its war machine is the greatest threat to world peace. They make these claims even as they enslave women and slaughter infidels who do not share their beliefs. In fact, American soldiers have put themselves in harm's way to defend or liberate millions of Muslims in Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Somalia, Afghanistan, and other countries. They have fought to save more Muslims from tyranny than any other military in modern history. It is the terrorists who threaten to destroy the West and replace it with an Islamic empire, not the other way around. Some say that America's support of Israel is the main cause of terrorist rage against us. True, Islamic radicals have nothing but hatred for Israel, the little Satan as they call it. But there is no reason to think that if the United States abandoned Israel, a staunch democratic ally, terrorists would suddenly grow fond of the great Satan and stop their war against the decadent West. Islamic terrorists are driven by a manic determination to force their religion and law on others. That is, at bottom, the age-old struggle between tyranny and freedom. Islamic radicals hate the freedom represented by Western democracy and will do all they can to replace it with their rule. Faisal Shahzad, a Pakistani-American who tried and failed to explode a bomb in Times Square in 2010, told us exactly what his aim was. He told a judge, "If I am given 1,000 lives, I will sacrifice them all for the sake of Allah fighting this cause, defending our lands, making the word of Allah supreme over any religion or system. The defeat of U.S. is imminent and will happen in the near future, inshallah, Allah willing, which will only give rise to much-awaited Muslim caliphate, which is the only true world order." What is life under the rule of Islamic radicals like? The reports coming out of territories controlled by ISIS offer a glimpse. Iran, a nation that exports terrorism to the world, offers another. In Iran, speech is restricted, and when opposed to the state, curtailed and violently punished. Radio and TV broadcasts are state-controlled. Books are vetted by the Ministry of Culture. Freedom of assembly is prohibited. Islamic law, Sharia, permits flogging, amputation, and execution by stoning or hanging for various social and political offenses. In the 1980s, during its war with Iraq, Iran's leadership sent thousands of preteens and teenagers to clear minefields by walking through them and blowing themselves to pieces. The children were given little plastic keys to carry with them to unlock paradise after the mines exploded. In 2014, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, declared that jihad against America would go on. This battle will only end when the society can get rid of the oppressors front with America at the head of it, which has expanded its claws on human mind, body, and thought, he told members of Iran's parliament. In the most repressive Islamic regimes, young people are punished for listening to Western music or wearing Western clothes. Women are assaulted for not covering their bodies and faces in public. Girls are prohibited from going to school. Women who commit adultery are stoned to death. Women are forced to undergo involuntary genital surgery. Homosexuals are executed. Ancient and priceless works of art are destroyed if deemed anti-Islamic, and children are taught that Jews are pigs and monkeys. Violence and murder are glorified. As one radical Islamic cleric declared in a television sermon on Palestinian television, "Blessings to whoever put a belt of explosives on his body or on his sons and plunged into the midst of the Jews." Islamic radicals spread their faith at gunpoint. In 2014, for example, the terrorist group Boko Haram kidnapped some 275 girls, many of them Christians, from a school in Chibok, Nigeria. The Christians were offered a choice: convert to Islam or die. Many of the girls were reportedly sold into slavery or forced into marriages. Boko Haram continues its rampage of massacres and kidnappings in northeast Nigeria and surrounding areas. Should we use terms like Islamic extremists and jihadists? The first necessary step in this fight is to call things what they really are, by their proper names. Some politicians and pundits, particularly liberal ones, are reluctant to use phrases like jihadists and Islamic extremists. They prefer terms like violent extremists and individuals who commit violence. They seem quick to describe terrorist attacks as isolated or lone wolf operations. In other words, they don't want to imply that terrorism is connected to Islam. Their reluctance is often based on political correctness. They don't want to be seen as criticizing or judging another culture in any way. They say they don't want to use language that might give people the idea that this is a religious war. They fear that talk of Islamic terrorism might bring retribution against innocent Muslims. The problem with their political correctness is that it's not in line with reality. Most terrorism in the world today is very much connected to radical Islam. It may be a warped version of Islam, but when terrorists are putting infidels to the sword because they don't follow Sharia law and are shouting Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest, as they blow themselves and others to pieces, it makes no sense to pretend that things are not what they are. The reality is this: the majority of Muslims in the world are peaceful, but over the last 20 years, many horrific terrorist acts have been committed in the name of Islam. It also makes no sense to hope against hope that each new attack is the work of one or two demented people acting in isolation, unconnected to a larger ideology. They certainly may be demented, and they may build bombs alone, but terrorists are usually connected in mind and spirit. In this age of the Internet, they are often very connected to Islamic terrorists in other lands. Why is it important to call our enemies by what they are? It's important because if we don't, we risk our own destruction. If we don't recognize our enemies, then we open ourselves all the more to danger. If we ignore their real motives and intentions, we can't defend ourselves as well. These are not enemies who will lay down their swords because we speak delicately. They view mealy-mouthed talk as a sign of weakness, and that makes them want to attack us all the more. What is the best way for the United States to respond to Islamic terrorism? Jihadists are at war with us, and they have vowed to keep it up. They post threats on Facebook and Twitter, such as, "We are in your state, we are in your cities, we are in your streets. You are our goals anywhere." ISIS has promised that we will raise the flag of Allah in the White House. The United States must fight back as hard as it can. There really is no other choice when facing a dangerous enemy that is determined to destroy us. This is a time when moral clarity is much needed, a time when Americans need to distinguish clearly between right and wrong. Radical Islam is evil staring us in the face, threatening to wipe out all we hold to be good. When good people fail to recognize evil for what it is, when they fail to meet it head-on with strength, evil has a way of overcoming good. This is an enemy that thrives on weakness and appeasement. Dealing with the pampered and effeminate Americans will be easy, Osama bin Laden predicted before the attacks on September 11, 2001. He was wrong about America's response to 9/11. Unfortunately, however, the United States has sometimes failed to respond forcefully to terrorism. A classic example is the September 11, 2012 attack on the woefully unprotected American consulate in Benghazi, Libya, which killed U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 3 other Americans. The Obama administration initially claimed the attack was not terrorism, but rather an uprising caused by an anti-Muslim video circulating on the internet. That story proved to be false. The United States then vowed to punish those responsible for the attack, but moved very slowly in efforts to hunt down the attackers. That kind of response only encourages terrorists. Tyrants prey on uncertainty and weakness. They generally do not attack where and when they think they will lose. This is a long struggle. The only way this nation will have the perseverance to continue the fight is if we remember what we are fighting for. The United States has provided more freedom to more people than any nation in history. It has provided a greater degree of equality to more people than any nation in history. It has created more prosperity and spread it more widely than any nation in history. It has brought more justice to more people than any in history. Our open, tolerant, prosperous, peaceable society is the marvel and envy of the ages. Consider this. There is no Muslim country where Muslims can enjoy more political, religious, or economic freedom than they can in the United States. That is to our credit, and probably to our enemies' resentment as well. We cannot take our rights and freedoms for granted, because Islamic radicals have sworn to bring jihad against them. If we do not defend ourselves strenuously and fight back against those who intend to destroy us, we ourselves will be destroyed. Part 5. Traditional Values. One of the most striking images in classical literature is from the Roman poet Virgil, who lived in the 1st century BC. His epic, the Aeneid, tells the story of how the Trojan hero Aeneas leaves Troy after its fall to the Greeks, wanders for years with a band of survivors, and finally establishes a new home in Italy, where his descendants found Rome. The image comes on the night of Troy's destruction, after the crafty Greeks have slipped out of the belly of their great wooden horse and taken the city by surprise. Aeneas tries to drive them back, but soon realizes it's hopeless, so he rushes home to save his family. He tells his aged father Anchises to gather their penates, little statues of their household gods that represent their most cherished customs and beliefs. He then hoists his father onto his shoulders, takes his boy Ascanius by the hand, and makes his way through the flaming city into the countryside. Artists have depicted the scene for centuries, one generation carrying the older generation, along with the traditions and values that will be handed down to the younger generation when they eventually reach their new home. This passing of wisdom and traditional values from one generation to the next lies at the heart of conservatism. The word conservative comes from the Latin word conservare, meaning to keep safe, observe, or maintain. Every generation has the responsibility of preserving our best values, along with the customs and institutions that help pass those values to the next generation. When one generation fails to pass along traditional values, things can go very wrong. It leaves people without a clear sense of what's important, of the difference between right and wrong. That can ruin lives and harm entire cultures. What are traditional values? First, and most important, traditional values include good moral values, old-fashioned virtues like honesty, courage, compassion, and responsibility. The moral values you hold make all the difference in how good your life is. That truth of the human condition has never changed, and will never change. Conservatives believe there are enduring moral truths in the universe. That is, there are rules of right and wrong behavior that have come down to us through the centuries and apply to all. Moral rules, such as it's wrong to steal, it's good to help others in need, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In many ways, trying to live by these rules is the central part of life. The striving to acquire virtues like self-discipline and perseverance is perhaps the greatest challenge we all face. Life is, in essence, a moral and civic endeavor. You don't have to be religious to have good moral values, but for many people, faith is the most vital part of morality. God anchors their sense of right and wrong. They believe that God has established the moral order of the universe. Faith lifts each person outside the self and inspires a larger sense of purpose. None of us is born knowing right from wrong or having good moral values. These things have to be learned. So the task of each generation is to pass good values on to the next generation. Conservatives believe that education is largely about the formation of good character. Young people acquire virtues like kindness and loyalty largely by practicing them until they become habits. They learn morality through the examples, expectations, and rules set by adults around them. The family is the most important institution when it comes to forming character. The moral lessons parents teach make all the difference. That's a big reason conservatives are so concerned about the breakdown of the American family and the fact that so many children are growing up in homes without both a mother and a father. Conservatives want the traditional institution of marriage to thrive because it helps keep families together. Strong marriages are not only good for men and women, but they're also the best way to raise children and give them solid values. Community institutions play critical roles in teaching good moral values. Institutions like churches, synagogues, and other houses of worship, schools, neighborhoods, volunteer groups such as the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. In fact, the entire culture is involved in transmitting values from one generation to the next. That includes the popular culture, the movies we watch, the books we read, the advertisements we see on TV, the music we download. Some of the messages our popular culture sends, like do whatever makes you happy and it's fine to sleep around, are directly opposed to traditional values. They're the kind of values that can get us in trouble. Why are traditional values important? They're important because they are necessary for a good life. Human experience is very clear. When people ignore traditional values, then they abandon their responsibilities and act without integrity. They end up with empty, selfish, unhappy lives. When they hold to good moral values, their lives tend to be marked by happiness, fulfillment, accomplishment, and generosity. Traditional values matter as much to society as they do to individuals. Russell Kirk, one of the most important conservative thinkers of the 20th century, put it this way: "A society in which men and women are governed by belief in an enduring moral order, by a strong sense of right and wrong, by personal convictions about justice and honor, will be a good society, whatever political machinery it may utilize, while a society in which men and women are morally adrift, ignorant of norms, and intent chiefly upon gratification of appetites, will be a bad society, no matter how many people vote and no matter how liberal its formal constitution may be." The great Polish novelist Joseph Conrad, in one of his Tales of the Sea, described perfectly the man without virtues. "They all knew him. He was the man that cannot steer, that cannot splice, that dodges the work on dark nights, that aloft holds on frantically with both arms and legs, and swears at the wind, the sleet, the darkness. The man who curses the sea while others work. The man who is the last out and the first in when all hands are called. The man who can't do most things and won't do the rest. The pet of philanthropists and self-seeking landlubbers. The sympathetic and deserving creature that knows all about his rights, but knows nothing of courage, of endurance, and of the unexpressed faith, of the unspoken loyalty that knits together a ship's company. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle pointed out that citizens are like sailors in a ship's crew. When sailors ignore their duties, the ship doesn't perform as well. When citizens ignore their duties, the ship of state doesn't sail quite as smoothly. Good, old-fashioned virtues make good sailors and good citizens. Among both, as Aristotle reminded us, the salvation of the community is the common business of them all. What are traditional American values? There are no particular values found only in America, but there is a broad set of ideals and beliefs traditionally associated with this country. Together, as a bundle, they make us who we are as a people. Our fundamental values are written into founding documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Abraham Lincoln once said that, "My ancient faith teaches me that all men are created equal." That ancient faith came to him from studying the ideals of the American founding and taking them to heart. You can also find that ancient faith in great speeches and writings like Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Our finest values show up again and again in American history. Knowing that history puts the present in perspective and helps us know how to proceed. Freedom of thought and speech, equality before the law, the right to worship God as we please, a fair opportunity for all, the dignity of each individual, government of the people and by the people, the right to one's own property. These are some of the values that lie at the American core. American values also include certain habits and attitudes of citizens that make our country work, civic virtues as they're called. Hard work, individual initiative, devotion to family, respect for the law, tolerance and appreciation for diversity, a spirit of commerce and free enterprise, belief in the power of education, responsibility for one's own actions and well-being. All these and more make up traditional American values. You can no doubt think of others to add to the list. Conservatives believe it's a good collection of values, as good as any nation has ever known. It's tradition worth standing up for. Who's to say that one set of values is any better than another? What's true for one person may not be true for the next. Who are we to impose our values on anyone else? If it makes you feel good, do it. There's something very appealing about those kinds of statements. They have a freedom-loving, live and let live ring to them. Saying them makes us feel non-judgmental. And there's some truth to them. People are different after all. They like different things and see the world in different ways. Here's the problem. Some people take that kind of thinking too far. In their view, no one set of values is any better than another. Different moral beliefs are all valid and equally true. It's a philosophy called moral relativism. On the surface, it may seem open-minded, but it's deeply flawed thinking. The fact is that some values and behaviors are better than others. For example, a man who tries to be a good father is acting better than a man who gets a woman pregnant and walks away without another thought. Whether we want to admit it or not, we judge people by their moral values all the time, as we should. We don't choose people who cheat, lie, and steal as friends, for very good reason. Moral relativism makes our eyesight fuzzy about what's really wrong and what's really right. When we take the attitude that there are no absolute moral standards, it's hard to tell the good and true from the false and shameful. In 2014, the watchdog group Campus Reform asked students at Harvard University which is a greater threat to world peace, America or the terrorist organization ISIS. Some had clearly learned a blame America first lesson. One answered, "In many ways, I have to think it's America. The amount of spending that America has done on causes of potential destruction in the world is really outlandish. American imperialism and our protection of oil interests in the Middle East are destabilizing the region and allowing groups like ISIS to gain power," another student said. "We are, at some level, the cause of it." As a Western civilization, we're to blame for a lot of the problems that we're facing now, another said. I don't think anyone would argue that we didn't create the problem of ISIS ourselves. This is the fruit of moral relativism. Students who hold the United States in the same regard as a terrorist group that carries out beheadings, crucifixions, and mass murders of innocent people. Moral relativism may allow us to tell ourselves that we're fair-minded, tolerant people. It's certainly much easier than calling out real wrongdoing, but it's a valueless way to see the world that leads to foolish thinking and turns a blind eye to evil. Why do conservatives care about tradition? Because there's much wisdom and truth to be found in tradition. It's civilization's way of transmitting the best values, thoughts, and achievements from generation to generation. Traditional institutions like family and church are crucial for handing down good moral values. Written institutions like the U.S. Constitution preserve freedom, equality, and other ideals. Customs like Thanksgiving Day and rituals like the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier remind us of things worthwhile. They touch what Abraham Lincoln called the mystic chords of memory that connect us to each other and to civilization's lasting vision. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants, Sir Isaac Newton wrote. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, the wisdom accumulated through centuries of human experience. We advance civilization by mastering that wisdom, adding a bit to it, and passing it on. Conservatives appreciate the role of the past in shaping the present. That's one reason so many of them love history and its vast record of humanity's insights, trials, mistakes, and triumphs. Studying history helps us tell the difference between what's enduring and worthwhile and what's not. It can help us be better people. For in history you have a record of the infinite variety of human experience plainly set out for all to see, the ancient Roman historian Livy wrote, and in that record you can find for yourself and your country both examples and warnings, fine things to take as models, base things, rotten through and through, to avoid. Tacitus, who followed in Livy's footsteps, added, This I regard as history's highest function, to let no worthy action be uncommemorated, and to hold out the reprobation of posterity as a terror to evil words and deeds. Aren't traditional values really just racist, sexist, anti-gay attitudes? No. That's an assumption liberals sometimes make. They'll say things like, conservatives want to take us back to the time of segregation. If they really believe that, they have a profound misunderstanding of what conservatism is all about. Conservatives don't want to go back 50 or 100 or 200 years. They fully understand that in a lot of ways, the good old days weren't very good for a lot of people. That's true of even a few decades ago. Blacks lived with a set of traditions imposed on them that included staying out of whites-only restaurants, sitting in the back of buses, and far worse. Women, by age-old tradition, faced limited career choices. Gays risked ostracism and beatings. It should go without saying that it's good those norms are gone. Conservatives understand that just because a certain value has been around for a long time doesn't make it right or good. Age doesn't necessarily determine something's worth. It has to be judged on its own merits. Values are good if they are good, and bad if they are bad, regardless of whether they are new or old. All over the world there are bad traditions and values that need to end. Slavery, for example, is an evil institution that has been around for thousands of years and still persists in many places in the world. There are still countries where ancient customs turn women into second-class citizens, forcing them into marriage, limiting their education, controlling their movement in public. Traditions like those are nothing more than human rights violations. Societies can fall into bad conventions, just like people can fall into bad habits. Getting rid of them is one way civilization moves forward. Sometimes it takes a long time, just like getting rid of bad personal habits can take a while. Conservatives aren't interested in perpetuating hurtful traditions. They want to preserve the ones that do good for people, ones that make lives fuller, like going to church and raising the flag on the 4th of July. They want to end traditions that cause harm. The story of Aeneas at the beginning of this chapter, when the Trojan hero carries his father and his household gods out of the burning city, helps us remember that carrying forward traditional values from one generation to the next is vital to civilization's success. But it's important to understand that conservatives are talking about carrying forward good traditions. The bad ones need to be left behind. Isn't change the American way? Change is good. You can't live in the past. Go forward, not back. Those are all, in a way, very American thoughts. The United States has always been about innovation and change. After all, we started with a revolution and became the first country created out of the belief that people should govern themselves. We're a nation of inventors. We've given the world airplanes, cell phones, the internet, and rock and roll. But it's important to recognize that sometimes new and improved turns out to be cheap and fleeting, like those miracle gadgets advertised on TV that end up in the junk closet. And what's old isn't always musty, stale, and stagnant. Often it's irreplaceable, like a solid old building knocked down to make way for a new one that turns out to have thin walls and a bad foundation. Sometimes students jump to take new college classes like Zombies in Movies 101. These classes sound fun, but they don't really teach much, and years later the students may well look back and think, I wish I'd learned a little about Shakespeare or astronomy instead. Values shift, and the new ones may not be so good. How about a culture that values spending several hours a day surfing the internet or watching TV instead of studying? Or one that decides it's acceptable to run up huge debts on credit cards instead of saving? There is a part of human nature that gets bored unless it has something new and bright and shiny to occupy its attention. The writer C.S. Lewis called it the horror of the same old thing. The relentless desire for novelty can make an artist think, who cares what people painted 500 years ago? If I make something startling and different, it's art. Never mind whether it takes any real talent or skill. Or it can make a politician think, the ideas of the founders are outdated. We need new principles now. Conservatives are always mindful that many traditions and values that have been around for a long time have lasted precisely because they do good. If we throw them out, there's a good chance we'll lose something precious, and the replacement will be inferior. It's tempting to always ask, is it new? Is it cool? Is it flashy? But we shouldn't forget to ask, is it right? Is it good? Will it last? Marriage and family. Eternal God, creator and preserver of all mankind, send thy blessing upon these thy servants, whom we bless in thy name. Enable them to perform through all their years the vows which they have made in thy presence. May they seriously attend to the duties of the new relation into which they have now entered, that it may not be to them a state of temptation and discord, but of mutual love and peace. Grant them the virtues of trust and patience and underlying affection. May they be blessings and comforts to each other, sharers of each other's joys and sorrows, loyal companions in the life and work of every day, and helpers, each to the other, in all the chances and changes of this mortal life. From a traditional wedding service. Words like these aren't as familiar to Americans as they once were. Even if they sound familiar, many people don't take them as seriously as their parents or grandparents did. During the past several decades, family life in the United States has seen devastating changes. Here are some numbers that tell the story. More Americans are choosing not to get married. In 1960, about 1 in 10 adults over the age of 25 had never married. By 2012, the number was 1 in 5. Far too many children are born to unmarried mothers. In 2010, 29% of children born to white, non-Hispanic mothers were born out of wedlock. For Hispanics, the rate was 53%. In the black community, 72% of births were to unmarried mothers. Overall, 4 out of 10 babies in America are born to unmarried women. In 1970, 12% of children lived with a single parent. During the next 4 decades, the number more than doubled to 27%. As many as half of all American children will spend some time living with just one parent. The late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York was once asked to name the biggest and most important change he had seen in his half-century of public service. All over the North Atlantic world, he said, it was the coming apart of the family. A few indicators are pointing in the right direction. For example, divorce rates and teen pregnancy rates in the United States have improved in recent years. Overall, however, the traditional American family, one with a mother and father who are married and raising their children together, is in bad shape. This breakdown of the family is doing much damage to America. Why is the traditional American family broken down? There is no single cause of the breakdown of the traditional family. Shifts in people's values, habits, and attitudes have brought on changes. One big cause is the modern emphasis on the self. Our culture is full of messages like, do your own thing, make your own rules, and don't let others define you. They're very American messages, in a way, ones about individualism and personal freedom. The problem is that people use that kind of thinking to justify selfish behavior, like fathering children and then walking away from them. Many people view sex as a no-risk activity they can enjoy without marriage. As long as we use contraceptives or the morning-after pill, they tell themselves, there's nothing to worry about. Why tie ourselves down? When they do get married, many view it not as a sacred obligation, but as a contract, one that can always be broken. If they start to feel unhappy or bored, they just get out. Some marriages need to end, of course, especially in cases of spouse abuse. But far too many marriages end because people feel they have no moral duty to continue them, and because they can easily obtain a divorce. Living in an affluent society like the United States can put pressure on marriage. The more we have, the more we want, sometimes at the expense of relationships. Husbands and wives often spend more time at work and less time with family. If not enough attention is paid, marital bonds can come undone. Meanwhile, many poor young women who get pregnant don't want to marry the fathers of their children because they don't trust them. They believe the men don't work enough or earn enough money, or that they're too violent. All these factors and more have harmed the traditional family. Unfortunately, there are few signs that things will get better anytime soon. What's so great about the traditional family? The traditional family, a husband and wife living with their children, is vital to civilization's success. It is society's fundamental institution, the one where crucial lessons are taught. Raising children is the family's most important job. Families supply the love, nurture, protection, and guidance that children can get nowhere else. Intellectual training begins in the home. For example, study after study tells us that young children become much better students when parents read aloud to them. Family is where the first and most important moral training takes place. Children aren't born knowing the difference between right and wrong. They have to learn how to be honest, brave, responsible, and kind. Teaching virtues is perhaps a parent's highest calling, and attention to virtues is one of the important ties that binds a family together. It is a characteristic of man that he alone has any sense of good and evil, of just and unjust, and the like, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote, and the association of living beings who have this sense makes a family. Parents teach crucial lessons in several ways. They teach by example. When children witness parents working hard, treating others kindly, and taking responsibility for their own actions, they are apt to behave the same way. Parents teach by setting high expectations, establishing rules, and talking about right and wrong. Countless daily lessons, getting homework done on time, choosing the right friends, speaking respectfully to others, shape the kind of adults young people eventually become. When families fail to teach such lessons, young people's lives can go very wrong. There is much evidence to show that, generally speaking, children who grow up without both a mother and a father in the home are more likely to struggle in many different ways. For example, children raised by single parents are not as likely to do well in school or get a college degree as children raised by married parents. They are more likely to engage in delinquent and illegal behavior. Daughters raised by single mothers are more likely to have sex and get pregnant while adolescents, and sons are twice as likely to spend time in jail. A child living with a single mother is 4 to 5 times as likely to be poor as a child raised by married parents. None of this means that a single mom or dad can't raise children well. Many do, and those children grow up to be fine, successful adults. But it does mean that it's much harder for one parent than it is for two. Single parents often find themselves spread too thin. Married parents can share responsibilities, so it's easier to spend time with children, set expectations, and enforce rules. The more two-parent families our country has, the better off it is. It is impossible for government agencies or volunteer organizations to replace the family. They can provide some aid, such as financial assistance to struggling single moms or daycare for children when no adult is at home. But government programs don't make good parents. When families fail, there really is no other institution capable of making up the difference. Why are fathers important? Fathers are important because children need them, badly. Boys and girls are better off with a devoted father in the home. There are 2 different words meaning father in Latin. Genitor means a biological father. Pater means a father who takes responsibility. Unfortunately, there are far too many men who don't know or care what it means to be a pater. In this country, about 1/3 of all children live apart from their fathers. In some cases, it's unavoidable. But often young men are fathering children and then failing to meet their obligations. In many instances, they simply walk away and leave young mothers to struggle to raise their children alone. Men and women are different creatures, and though their responsibilities as parents overlap, they offer different sorts of care. When fathers are absent from young people's lives, it's extremely difficult for others to replace them. The time-honored responsibility of fathers is to protect their children from physical danger. Good fathers are sources of discipline and strength. Kids need to hear them say things like, "If you cross that line, you'll have to deal with me," and "Real men do their duty." Young boys tend to knock things over, smash things, climb as high as they can, get as dirty as they can. They need fathers to help keep their energy in check, to teach them it's not all right to push, hit, and grab. As they grow older, boys need dads to help them channel their energy into studies, sports, and other activities. They need fathers to demonstrate how they should act when they grow up. That includes showing how good husbands treat their wives. When boys grow up with committed fathers, they're more likely to do better in school, go on to college, stay out of trouble, and get a good job. Boys who grow up without fathers are more likely to wind up on the street or in jail, use alcohol, get into drugs, and be unemployed. For girls, good fathers provide security and protection, including protection from young men. They show what responsible, devoted manhood looks like. Girls who have warm, protective fathers are more likely to do better in school, be more assertive, and enjoy higher self-esteem. They are less likely to use drugs or alcohol, suffer from depression, abuse their bodies, or have a baby out of wedlock. Why should men and women get married when they can simply live together? Marriage is a relic of a day gone by. We love each other, that's all that matters. We don't need a ceremony or a piece of paper to be happy. Those are the kinds of things people who live together without getting married often say. But marriage is much more than a certificate. It's a sacred and legal pledge to join a lasting, devoted union. It is, or should be, a solemn obligation. Living together without marriage means living without that commitment. That might bring more freedom, but it also means that living together is less likely to be a stable, enduring relationship. There are good practical reasons to get married. Married people tend to enjoy better physical health and psychological well-being. They're usually better off financially than unmarried people. Married couples report greater sexual satisfaction. They're likely to live longer. More important, there are powerful moral reasons to marry. Marriage is a shared moral endeavor. In healthy marriages, men and women try to improve themselves for the sake of their loved one. They strive to live up to the commitments made in wedding vows, to be faithful to each other, to love, honor, and take care of each other in sickness and in health. Healthy marriages bring happiness, in part, because they make us better people. Of course, marriages also make people happier because they often produce children. President Theodore Roosevelt once noted that there are many kinds of success in life worth having, but for unflagging interest and enjoyment, a household of children, if things go reasonably well, certainly makes all other forms of success and achievement lose their importance by comparison. Marriage helps satisfy the deepest longing of the soul, the desire to love and be loved. Along with parenthood, having your heart braided to another is life's most joyful experience. What greater thing is there for two human souls, the great writer George Eliot asked, than to feel that they are joined for life, to strengthen each other in all labor, to rest on each other in all sorrow, to minister to each other in all pain, to be one with each other in silent, unspeakable memories at the moment of the last parting. For people of faith, marriage is sacred. The Catechism of the Catholic Church reminds us that God Himself is the author of marriage. God created man and woman in His image, and their mutual love is an image of His absolute and unfailing love. This is the most profound aspect of marriage. It is a reflection of divine love. Why are many conservatives against the idea of same-sex marriage? Attitudes about same-sex marriage have changed amazingly fast in recent years. The country is divided about whether it should be legal, but a slight majority of Americans support the idea. Several courts have ruled in favor of same-sex marriage, and as this book was being written, it was legal in most states, with the issue headed to the U.S. Supreme Court for a ruling on whether it is constitutional for states to ban it. Many conservatives oppose same-sex marriage, but not all do. Conservatives of a libertarian bent are likely to think that government has no business telling people who they can and can't marry. Younger conservatives are more likely to support same-sex marriage than older conservatives. That's true of the population as a whole. Younger Americans back same-sex marriage much more than older Americans. Conservatives who oppose same-sex marriage do so for a variety of reasons. Some believe homosexual behavior is immoral. For some, it's a matter of religious conviction. They believe that traditional marriage is a sacred institution established by God and that no one has a right to redefine it. Some conservatives argue that creating children is central to the idea of marriage. It sets the union of man and woman apart from other relationships, which is why societies ancient and modern have given special status to heterosexual marriage. Many conservatives also worry that redefining marriage as whoever you love opens the door to legal polygamy, marriage that includes more than two partners. Legal scholars have pointed out that if marriage is based solely on the principle of people loving each other, there is no rationale to deny 3 or 4 or 5 people who say they all love each other and want a group marriage. Conservatives value tradition, so they're wary of changing such a fundamental institution. The traditional family is the best proven setting for raising children. If we loosen standards to fit a marriage is different for different people attitude, many conservatives argue there won't be much left of marriage at the end of the day. That will be bad for families, for children, and for society. This nation has embarked on a large-scale social experiment with marriage. No one is sure how it will turn out. For conservatives who believe in the sanctity of traditional marriage, the challenge will be to navigate changes while maintaining their values. It won't be the first or last time they face such a challenge. How can Americans put the institution of the family back together? This is a hard question that Americans have been struggling with for quite some time. No one in Washington has come up with a good answer, and frankly, they're not likely to. These are not the kinds of problems that are really fixable from the halls of Congress or the White House. In many respects, these problems are due to moral choices, such as the choice of a young man to father a baby he has no intention of raising, or the choice of an unmarried woman to get pregnant when she has no intention of marrying the father. To fix things, the country's moral climate will have to change. This means that attitudes and behaviors must change. That will take the effort of a great many people working together. It will take priests, ministers, rabbis, and other religious leaders. It will take principals, teachers, business leaders, Hollywood directors, actors, and sports figures. It will take government leaders, from the president on down, and a lot of moms, dads, and grandparents. The messages will have to be loud and clear. Men and women should be married before they start having babies. Raising children alone is a terrible struggle for most single mothers. Men who father children and then walk away from them are doing a terrible wrong. Men and women raising children together as a family is the right thing to do and the best thing for children. Marriage can lead to some of the greatest joys and deepest fulfillments people can know. Can attitudes and values change? They can, and do. For example, attitudes about racism have changed much for the better in the United States over the last several decades. Beliefs about the importance of marriage and family can improve too. One thing is certain: messages matter. It makes a difference, for example, whether people get messages from television and music telling them that responsible teens wait to have sex and that good men raise their children, or whether they get messages saying that sleeping around is the norm and that everyone should live by his or her own rules. In the end, the solution is up to individuals. Governments and other organizations can't make moral choices for people. They can give us some help when needed, but it's the commitment of individuals that counts. Individual mothers, fathers, and families nurturing their children. Faith and religion. Our Father, which art in heaven, we pray for all of the people of our country, that we may learn to appreciate more the goodly heritage that is ours. We need to learn, in these challenging days, that to every right there is attached a duty, and to every privilege an obligation. We believe that, in the eternal order of things, Thou hast so ordained it, and what Thou hast joined together, let us not try to put asunder. Teach us what freedom is. May we all learn the lesson that it is not the right to do as we please, but the opportunity to please, to do what is right. Above all, may we discover that wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. May we have that freedom now, in His presence here, to lead us and to help us keep this nation free. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. The Reverend Peter Marshall, Chaplain of the United States Senate, 1947 to 1949. This prayer contains much to think about. The Reverend Peter Marshall opened the United States Senate's day with it on April 24, 1947, a time when humanity had just survived the catastrophe of World War II and faced the growing menace of communist totalitarianism. The prayer's wisdom is just as apt for the challenges of our day. Not all conservatives are religious, but many are. Even the ones who are not religious tend to value the special role religion has always played in this country. Most conservatives believe that this country is a better, stronger place because of the American people's faith in God. Wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, the prayer says. That belief has long been part of the American character. It's part of what makes the United States a great and good nation. Is it true that this country's founding principles are rooted in the Christian and Jewish religions? Yes. America's founding principles are rooted in several sources, from the writings of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers to the essays of Enlightenment figures such as John Locke. The Jewish and Christian faiths, sometimes called the Judeo-Christian tradition, were a vital source of ideals. They had an enormous influence on the founders' thinking. Most of this country's founders were people of faith. They were overwhelmingly Christian, and in forging this nation, they looked to God. The first act of the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia in 1774 was to pray for wisdom. The members knelt with heads bowed.